were a number of, let's call them skirmishes in the NBA over the past weekend. And I'm going to talk about today why that I think is actually good for the game. We're going to look at that. Plus, De'Aaron Fox comes out and adamantly denies some of the claims around him and former head coach Mike Brown. And we're going to look at the Los Angeles Lakers and their recent trade as well. We're going to get to all that and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm one of the hosts here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And hey, things got a little testy over the weekend, right? You had what went down with Yusuf Nurkic and Najee Marshall in the Suns and Dallas Mavericks game that went down on Friday. And then of course you had the Houston Rockets and Miami Heat skirmish that went down as well. And it's just been, hey, listen, it's been a very interesting weekend. And here's what I'm going to say, right? This is completely basketball fan of me. I know a lot of my videos are analytics based or, news based and talk about this, but I just wanted to have a conversation as a basketball fan real quick for a second. I think this is actually good for the game in a sense, right? I think when you look at the NBA for so long, we have talked about how it's not really as competitive as what it was in the sense that, listen, I want there to be rivalries in the NBA. I want there to be teams that in some cases just don't like each other, right? I think that that's best for things. And while we've had a little bit of that here and there, right? And in no way am I saying this is all of a sudden going to turn into something that the whole NBA is going to go to. Like, you don't want fights, but you want tension, right? You want pride. You want teams to just get physical with each other. And I think for so long in the NBA, we've had this thing where it's the buddy-buddy system, right? All these guys are friends off the court, so thus you don't really get the same kind of fervor you've gotten in the past and things like that. And like I said, I don't want it to turn into hockey. I don't want fights and things to break out because I don't want people to get suspended. That's not good for the game of basketball either, right? But me as a basketball fan, I tell you what, I look at this and I say, good. Right, I'm glad that people are taking a little bit more pride, that people are getting a little chippy with each other. I like pettiness on the basketball court, right? Early in the season, we had the Ja Morant, LeBron James pettiness, right? That went back and forth a little bit, and I like that. When people do the too small, I like a little bit of that. But I think there's some of this where it's almost like it went too far the other way. Like, you don't want teams getting in fights every other night. You don't want this to happen every weekend. You don't want when you have teams going against each other that you expect a fight to happen. We don't want malice in the palace. We don't want anything like that. But you do want it to be a spirit of competitiveness yet again, right? And so when you look at some of this and what's come down to, like, it's frustrating. Make no mistake about it. I'm sure it's frustrating for players and things like that. But, these guys are good enough. They're smart enough. It is what it is when it comes down to it. Like, you're going to have guys that are going to do their thing. And so, that's what it comes down to. Even Jimmy Butler and his antics after the scuffle with posting a picture that had Houston police, on it and being a little petty when it comes down to that. Like, you want that in the game. You want personality back in the game. And when you have these guys out there, they are competing. Make no mistake about it. And then sometimes in that competition, the fiery side is going to come out. It's just going to happen when it comes down to it. And of course, the Amen Thompson, Tyler Hero thing and how that developed and how that went, it went a little overboard. I'd also say the use of Nurkic, how he open hand basically smacked Najee Marshall. Listen, Najee was trying to punt, like he didn't quite make the contact that he wanted to make, but Najee was trying to throw a haymaker, right? And so I know that suspensions have already come down for this. And for the Dallas Mavericks one, you're going to get suspensions on the other side as well. It's going to happen, right? You can only avoid that so much. But to me, as a basketball fan and watching this, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm glad that some players are starting to take this a little personal again. You want it to be taken personal because this is a bit of personal when it comes down to it. Like, it just is what it is. These guys are competing. These guys, and Yusuf Nurkic has already been a guy he's done some shit over the course of his career, right? You got P.J. Washington get a 1-game suspension from it. Marshall got a 4-game suspension from it as well. And Nurkic got a 4-game suspension. And Marshall, I think, got a 3-game suspension. So, it's a nice amount of games when it comes down to it because the NBA is going to have to police some things. But you want that fire. And I think the game needs that a little bit back. We saw, like, look at the NBA Cup games. Those players were out there competing. And I think when you really are out there competing for a full 82 games, that's going to breed some of that discontent, right? That's going to breed some dislike for some players that are giving you some work at times. And so as the game gets more competitive, as these teams get more competitive, you're going to see more and more. I would hope to see, like I said, not to the level of punches being thrown, but a little testiness in games. And I do think that that's what's best for the NBA. Again, you look at ratings being down, not to say you want to, make this stuff happen that's artificial. You don't want artificially created, but I think that if you have a game where these players actually have something against each other, these players actually want to outcompete each other, these players have a little bit of a rivalry, that's the next thing that can help fix this 48% slide that the NBA ratings are on. But let me know what you guys think on all that down below. You see the kind of the fights and kerfuffles that have happened over the NBA this past weekend. How do you feel about it? How do you feel it impacts the game? And do you look at me like it and say, hey, I want to see some of this stuff, but just keep the punches thrown a little bit down. Let me know what you guys think on that. With that said, we did get, we got a coach fired. Mike Brown got fired over the course of the weekend. Shout out to Kev and everybody who held it down on that breaking news episode. And of course, there's been a lot of narratives around there. Now, I'm going to give my own personal opinion, then we'll get into the updates that have come out since then. And I look at this and I say, I don't think Mike Brown was the problem there. That's just my own personal thing. I don't think that Mike Brown was the problem. I don't think that De'Aaron Fox is necessarily the problem either. But I understand when your franchise does not live up to expectations, there's usually some type of scapegoat. And as of right now, the Kings are in a place where they don't want to risk upsetting De'Aaron Fox, right? We've talked a lot about De'Aaron Fox and him maybe trying to force a trade. Eventually, he has 1 year left on his deal after that. And we all know the power that players have in that last year of the deal. And so Mike Brown was fired. And while I do think that, like, Mike Brown's one of those coaches that you can get coaches better than Mike Brown. You can get coaches much worse than Mike Brown. Mike Brown is a coach that also seems to relate to his players, and he's a coach that you know at a minimum that he's going to try to get the most out of every player and every roster that he has, right? Like I said, I look at Mike Brown and saying that I could see him as one of those coaches where he can get you to the hump, but sometimes if you need to get over that hump, maybe you do have to remove him and get a new guy. And that's just saying and trying to understand both sides. But this was not about that. This, I think, was about trying to find somebody to blame for the way that the Kings season has gone. I've already talked about my reasoning that I think was like, yeah, De'Aaron Fox hasn't quite lived up to expectations. I think that the DeMar DeRozan signing has been harder for them to kind of overcome or adapt to, I should say, as what they thought when they signed it, right? I also think when it comes down to it, like we heard today as well, that Mike Brown wanted DeMar DeRozan to come off the bench. And we already know, like me as a Bulls fan, I know but DeMar does not want to come off the bench. But there's been a lot of narratives as well as, maybe De'Aaron Fox was behind it or the relationship between him and De'Aaron Fox had went wrong. And, he said this, there was never any pushback about anything. The narrative of us butting heads or me going to management saying anything is bullshit. So you can run with that if you want to. And listen, I love when players say stuff like this because so often things get put on players' names or things get said that players want this or this is their desire, this is what they really want. And ultimately, like, it's not. Like, it is a lot of narrative around. And I do think there's, of course, naturally going to be a lot of narrative around a coach being fired. It comes with the territory, right? I'm not going to act like I don't understand narrative being around there. But, of course, with Mike Brown being fired and all the criticisms that have come out from coaches around the league and things like that, keep in mind, Mike Brown just won Coach of the Year in the 2022-23 season, and the Coach of the Year curse continues to be a thing. It's not like that's a safety thing when it comes down to it. Now, Doug Christie's taken over. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But, when it comes down to it, Mike Brown, to me, is not he's not a bad coach. And like I said before, I don't think him or De'Aaron Fox were the problem with the Kings thing. I think there's a lot going on with this Kings team and why they did not live up to the expectations they were hoping they were building off of coming into the season. But it is what it is. Like, and even despite their record, they have the 10th highest scoring offense in the league through the Sacramento Kings. And this is still an early part of the season. I get it. A 13-19 record in the Western Conference is hugely concerning. But it's not like the season was done and over with. I don't think that this firing of Mike Brown is something that needed to happen now, unless there were some things going on behind the scenes that we may never become privy to. And that is also a case that can happen sometimes. Sometimes those stories come out years down the road. Maybe it wasn't friction with De'Aaron Fox and Mike Brown. Maybe it was friction with other players on the roster, or maybe with the front office and Mike Brown. There's a lot that could go into that. But De'Aaron Fox adamantly stating he did not initiate the firing of Mike Brown, and that the relationship, there was no butting heads between them. Now, I'm going to choose to take his word for it. Now, I think both could be true, right? You can have some tension, but not necessarily be butting heads, right? Like, people who know that, like, you can have some tension with one of your homies. That doesn't mean that you guys are out there hating each other, that you're butting heads. You guys can't be in the same room and can't talk and communicate about things like grown-ass men. Sometimes you got to work through your things. Now, that option isn't going to present itself right now for this team to do and get over. But I think that sometimes, of course, it's natural to look at a franchise that was trending up. You look at everything that was going with the Sacramento Kings. I talk about this a lot on this show, right? Is the Kings were a team that they were starting to get an identity about not just the team of the players that were on the court, but a franchise, right? The light the beam thing and how that coincided with their fans and that type of thing becoming a movement and things for them, like having their own thing. That's something, right? And so, it's unfortunate that, that this, now I'm not saying it's going to be a wash of a season per se. I will say that there is definitely a concern there now about what the season is going to look like the rest of the way, because Doug Christie's coming in and he has to, and we've seen it. It's hard for interim coaches to come in and really change some things. So a lot of things are probably going to stay the same, but basically all eyes are going to be on Christie because, listen, if Christie does get a chance to turn this around, the Kings start winning, he may get an opportunity to be the next head coach. He already has a relationship with some of those players. And then he'll get an offseason to really instill his own things, and we'll see what happens there. But I think overall right now, when you look at this thing with the Kings, is that it's in the fucking toilet. Like, it's very concerning, and they're going to want to try to correct the ship if they can. And I do think the Kings are going to try to do everything in their power to hold on to De'Aaron Fox because, like I said, he was drafted there. And the Kings either have to trade or they have to draft their stars. They aren't typically a free agent destination. They did get DeMar DeRozan, but we all know how that kind of went. Like, DeMar's market just wasn't there. He wanted to be back in California. The Bulls worked out a sign and trade with him, and it is what it is, right? But so they don't get the marquee free agents usually. They got to draft everybody that really develops for that team, and they're just trying to find their way. And so, we'll see if the Kings can turn this around. This season is not done. It's not outside the realm of possibility, especially with how well the Kings' offense is scoring, for them to turn it around. It's just not. Right now, they only sit at 3.5 games back of a playing spot. And in the Western Conference, a hot week or two can completely change your trajectory. Now, they are losers of 6 in a row. They lost 7 out of their last 10 games. So, that's there as well. But, when you have a team like the Suns above them that are also losing, things like that, you just never know how things are going to go. Health plays a role, trades play a role. So we'll see if the Kings can maybe salvage some of this season, but more importantly, can they salvage that with De'Aaron Fox? Because there are already starting to be rumblings now that De'Aaron Fox has come out and basically said, hey, I didn't call. I didn't go to management. I didn't ask for Mike Brown to be fired. Of course, that's adding more concern around maybe De'Aaron Fox is preparing for his way out of Sacramento. And if that's the case, Sacramento Kings are going to find a very hard time to not only, to get their franchise, to get them back on track if that's the case. I mean, maybe they hope so, and whatever they can get in a trade or something like that can help them. But it could be a tall test for the Sacramento Kings. But let me know what you guys think on that down below. Now, the Lakers made a trade over the weekend as well. And this was one that the Lakers have traded D'Angelo Russell, and 3 second-round picks. I'm thinking another player as well to get Dorian Finney-Smith in a Lakers jersey. Now, we know that we heard that before that the Lakers were kind of looking to make more mid moves as far as like not go for the swing for a star talent, but make moves that make sense to help their roster with what they're missing. Dorian Finney-Smith is a very solid three-point shooter. He's bringing true 3-and-D play to this Lakers team that does need some of that. And while I don't think this is right? I think especially when you look at the Lakers holding both their first-round picks that are eligible to be traded, they can do some things here. And I look at this, and I look at it and say this as well. If they do use one of their first-round picks to go out and get a center, and they're able to move AD to the 4, that does change some things for me. If you can get Jared Vanderbilt back healthy, and we know what Jared Vanderbilt can also be as a 3D player, you've added Dorian Finney-Smith to that as well, and if you're able to move AD back to the 4 where he can do more of his roaming and switching things that really make him a special player defensively, the Lakers may have something. Now, this trade doesn't overall change my view on the Lakers and where they can go this season. I thought coming into this, the Lakers are a team that can win some games, but I don't necessarily see them having the depth or the play enough to really go on a deep run or make it out the Western Conference or anything like that. But this is a team that could do some things in the playoffs. Now their roster doesn't make as much sense as it did before, because now theoretically you're going to have to move Austin Reeves to the 1. Max Christie's going to play the 2, right? You're probably going to bring Dorian Finney-Smith off the bench, which leaves Roy Hachimura, who's a solid defensive player for them as well at times. LeBron at the 4, AD at the 5 for now. And so that leaves now your bench unit with Gabe Vincent, Dalton Knecht, Dorian Finney-Smith, Jackson Haize. You saw Cam Reddish there at times, whatever how he looks, Shake Milton, right? So you got some players there on that bench. Like I said, the Lakers I still feel like a deal could be in the works for the Los Angeles Lakers. Personally, that's just my personal opinion. I haven't really read a lot about that to say that's the thing yet. But listen, they got one of the best 3-and-D wings in the game of basketball right now. And again, like I said, I'm not going to glaze this and act like it completely ups their ceiling overall, but I mean, like hugely, but it does help them a lot when it comes down to it. So, and we'll see what happens there with this Lakers team. But, they're trying to make their move while they got it. They got DFS with no first involved. And I think that this is a solid game, and they're going to keep being active out on the trade market to see what they can get. And I'm not mad about it. There's already been reports that, teams are surprised by it, especially with what the Lakers are able to give. I just said on the episode not too long ago that it seemed like no team was going to bail out the Lakers with an easy deal. I mean, hey, the Lakers got shit done. And they did so with still maintaining some flexibility to do some other things. The interesting part about all this is that it seemed like the Memphis Grizzlies were almost at the finish line to acquire Dorian Finney-Smith, and the Nets went with 3 second-round picks over the first-round pick that the Memphis Grizzlies were going to reportedly offer. And that's an interesting part of this, especially with the Nets being a team that should be in pick allocation mode. They went for the quantity of second-round picks in this one. And I mean, listen, with the depth in the next couple of drafts, you never know what's going to happen there as far as in the second round. Second-round picks also offer some flexibility as far as movement and other things. So that can end up paying off for them. But I guess we'll see what ultimately ends up coming down for, man. It's a solid trade for the Lakers. I want to make no mistake about it, but it's not really the move that I thought the Lakers would make. And it feels like there could be something else coming. And that next deal that the Lakers make, if they make a next deal, could be the one that maybe makes this thing all a little bit more clear if they do go after one of the centers and use their first round pick, or even maybe they go something different and go after Jeremy Grant or something like that. So, we'll see what happens. The Lakers probably are still going to remain active. We've already heard that from Mark Stein and others as well, and we'll see what happens when it comes down to it. But that's my time for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at NBA Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Show @gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything basketball related, and I'll see you guys the next time I feel like making a video. Probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.